As of 2017, approximately 23 countries have implemented decriminalization or legal regulation of one or more previously illegal drugs, quoted from a research paper on PubMed Central. So, why has the United States not followed in their footsteps? Decriminalization of drugs can be defined in many different ways. The way I and many others define it is that drug use and distribution should not be a punishable offense. This includes tickets and, of course, prison or jail time. Decriminalization doesn't mean that we approve or condone of drug use, just that it shouldn't be illegal. A plea to ban or abolish any drug wouldn't work, as there would always be a way to get that said drug, leading to the criminalization of the drug. There will always be a way to get a drug from the streets, and most of the time they will be laced with something that very well may kill you. Switzerland and Portugal are examples of countries that have solved many problems associated with keeping drugs prohibited with many different methods. Oregon has decriminalized drugs, but they didn't go far enough in the process. Drugs need to be legalized throughout the entire country to be effective in saving lives. Criminalization of drugs has counterproductive effects. So, why should drugs be decriminalized in the United States? Well, there are many reasons for that. If illicit drugs are decriminalized, there will be a massive drop in overdose deaths, crime, cases of HIV and hepatitis, and expenses of keeping people incarcerated. This has all been shown to be effective in many different countries that have decriminalized drugs. The decriminalization of drugs would replace punishment with resources to help people stay safe if they weren't willing to quit, or help with getting people off any addictive substance. In addition, quoted from the book The Legalization of Drugs, drug prohibition is destructive to public health. Since the vast majority of illicit drugs taken for recreational purposes are purchased on the street from unlicensed sellers, consumers can have no confidence about what they are buying. End quote. Street drugs are often laced with deadly impurities which can contribute to overdose deaths. Switzerland is one of the many countries that has taken an unorthodox method by America's standards and has decriminalized the use of what would be illicit drugs in the United States. Before Switzerland decriminalized opiates, HIV and AIDS were spreading and overdoses were happening at enormous rates. In 1991, they decriminalized drug consumption, reducing these rates drastically. They opened clean and medically supervised clinics where they can bring in their own substances and swap out clean used needles for clean ones. They also implemented a 24-hour-a-day service to begin immediate methadone treatment in hopes of people being able to wean off heroin at home and still maintain their jobs. Right now in the United States, you would need to go to a rehab center. It is extremely expensive, and you also risk losing your job as you would need to be there on an average of 30 days. As quoted from the article, Switzerland halts war on drugs, cuts deaths. The 6-month cost to the Swiss government for treating a person in its outpatient methadone treatment was $1,750, compared to the $20,000 for 6 months of incarceration, or $21,500 for not providing any treatment. End quote. The United States has sent more people per capita to prison for drug-related crimes than any other nation, and more than 10 times that of Switzerland's. In 2020, Oregon decriminalized possession of all drugs, as long as they are in small amounts and used for personal use only. Anyone caught with illicit drugs are given a $100 fine and a citation. If they call a hotline to screen for substance use disorder and get help, the charges can be waived. Now, critics are saying this is actually harmful, as the black market for drugs remains open. This is simply due to the fact that it didn't legalize the production and sale of drugs. In fact, it remains a felony punishable up to 20 years in prison and a $100,000 fine. To go further, the rest of the United States still bans possession of drugs, so the black market is still rampant due to the illegality of it throughout the United States. As quoted from the article by Jeffrey Murin and Jacob Winter, quote, prohibition encourages violence because illicit suppliers cannot use the legal and judicial system to resolve disputes, end quote. Oregon's decriminalization of the drug was a failure. Homicide and overdose rates increased in Oregon because it failed to solve the black market problem. If the rest of the United States decriminalized and provided safe ways to legally get drugs, this wouldn't be a problem, as there would be no black market. In 2001, Portugal decriminalized the use of illicit drugs and spent years before the law was enacted to shift resources from punishment to treatment and recovery processes. Fines were the main form of punishment for drug offenses, and in the year 2000, less than 1% of imprisoned drug offenders were incarcerated for drug use. After 2001, the country decriminalized drug trafficking. 12 years later, convictions for drug trafficking dropped by 40% and incarcerations by 50%. Drugs should be decriminalized to solve many of the problems we face here in America. Overdose deaths, crime, cases of HIV and hepatitis, and expenses of keeping people incarcerated. Both Switzerland and Portugal are great examples of what we should be doing to solve this. Oregon's decriminalization was a failure not because it decriminalized drugs, but because it didn't go far enough in its solution. The ban or abolishment of any drug wouldn't work, as there will always be a way to get a drug even if it were illegal, leading to the criminalization of the drug, creating a counterproductive outcome. Quoted from Treatment Magazine, on June 9th of 2020, a poll in the United States found that 66% of people would support decriminalizing drugs and switching costs to addiction treatment and recovery services. Evidently, it isn't hard to see why the war on drugs has failed, end quote. Here's a quote from Kellen Rossoniel. I think having polls like this and support gives incentive to politicians to start moving. But it really is going to depend on the communities stepping up and making their voices heard.